Good morning, everyone. Just give me a second to find my glasses, or we won't be seeing anything at all. So, as Sonia says, I'm dealing with financial considerations today. So the areas I'm going to be covering are funding year study, processing study, study tasks, critical factors considered, funding review, and charging for academic and for industry studies. So the first thing we look at is funding your study. So there's four main areas in which to fund your study. We have industry, government, private, non-profit institutions, and locally. So industry, we're talking about pharma advice companies, product safety and efficacy. So looking at a product that can be successfully marketed and make a profit for the company. And this is especially for randomized trials of new treatments. So the company generally supplies the drug and any placebo, and payment is often for enrolling patients into large trials which are conducted, analysed by the company. Next, we have government. So we're talking about Science Foundation Ireland, Health Research Board, Wellcome Trust. So once you submit your application here, it starts with an administrative review, followed by a peer review, followed by final recommendations. And anything that isn't funded can be revised or resubmitted, addressing the criticisms of the reviewers. Then private non-profit institutions, we're talking about foundations and professional societies. These are generally restricted to specific areas of interest, and they often fund small research programs, and decisions are often made by executive process rather than peer review. And then locally, we're talking about local research funds identified through the Dean's Office or the Research Office. These are small amounts, often made available quickly, generally restricted to specific purposes, such as pilot studies that lead to external funding or purchase of a piece of equipment. So then these are a sample of national networks we have in Ireland. These are all opportunities for collaboration and funding. So a significant number of research networks throughout Ireland and with international linkages will undertake clinical research ranging from full interventional clinical trials, providing specific support functions for clinical research. So each network and research group will have the capacity and potential to bring about sea change. And for each of the ones listed here, our researchers are either lead PIs or collaborators for each initiative. So then securing funding. So the first one we have here is value for money. So for grants, you're required to provide a detailed budget breakdown for the entire proposed project. It's usually 3 to 5 years for a grant. And details include personnel, itemized equipment, itemized supplies, itemized travel, it's generally all itemized, and other items such as publication, books, etc. For industry studies, you're also required to provide a detailed breakdown of direct and indirect costs associated with the study. And these are startup costs, study procedure costs, closeout costs, and other costs. And I'll cover that more in the next slide. So then deadlines. So funding calls are made throughout the year with specific deadlines. It always takes longer to get a submission together than you think it will, and you need to factor in time to consult with others regarding your submission. Then budget justification. So for grants, salaries will be a big cost of any research project, and job description should actually be included with your submissions. So reviewers realise the importance of each team member effort for the project success, but also look at percentage of time committed by key members. There's often criticism by reviewers of the small percentage of time committed for the project and the large number of other non-related projects people are working on. But at the other side of that, don't inflate beyond the description, beyond the job descriptions of what's required of a person. So budgets obviously can change as the needs of the project change, or their unexpected expenses or savings. Once the grant is awarded, within reason, an investigator is generally allowed to spend funds within a category differently to what is specified in the budget, as long as the changes are small and they're all appropriate to the study. However, if you want to make substantial changes or want to move stuff across sectors, you have to get approval from your funding body, and this should all be within the original budget fund. So specific guidelines for funders. So there's always like what information they require, what area the call relates to. Generally, there's budget limits per funding call, and there will usually be a list of allowable and non-allowable costs. Then available industry studies. So if a company hasn't worked in a country before, or they're struggling to find a PI even, they may go through the National Clinical Trials Office signposting service, which will have a list of PIs in different areas. The sponsor may contact the CRF directly and ask if they know of any relevant PIs for a study, or the sponsor may actually contact a PI directly if they've worked with them before, or if someone recommends them, if another colleague recommends them. Then sponsor negotiations. So sponsors and CROs are not actually interested in having your site accept costs below your budget. They need to demonstrate they're paying fair market value for the services for which they pay. They actually have a vested interest in the long-term financial health of all the companies in which they do recurring business. They appreciate that developing a compound to bring it to market is a long-term initiative that requires stability and longevity in all the companies in the chain. So since the sponsor and CRO don't know what your costs are, it is your responsibility to present them with a defensible budget based on your knowledge of the costs. And if the study comes to us from the CRFG, we can help with those sponsor negotiations. Okay, so then types of costs. So Chloe touched on this a bit earlier on. So we have direct costs, indirect costs, opportunity costs. So direct costs are costs incurred specifically related to conducting the study. They're broken down into project-related costs. So these are non-study visit-related costs. We're talking about the pre-study startup, closeout costs, and then study visit procedure costs. So we're talking about salaries of the PIs and other research personnel, procedure costs, assessment, recruitment costs, etc. And then indirect costs are costs of the study that represent necessary infrastructure in order to be able to conduct clinical research. So we're talking about overheads, we're talking about rent, utilities, rates, facility costs, legal costs, archives and record storage. Then opportunity cost is profit. So it's the required return of the asset on the assets used to conduct the study that could otherwise have been used for some other activity. And without this, an organisation cannot run itself outside of outside contributions. So then components of a clinical trial. So we need to ensure we're creating a budget. We're covering more than like participant recruitment and visit costs. There's other items to consider, such as study management, regulatory affairs, database development, database management, financial review, protocol and contract review, to name just a few of them. Then costing studies. So for industry-sponsored studies, define the rate apply, and details of these are available from our CRFG management team. And these have been standardized across all sites and all studies. There's various costing templates that we use. For example, the NIHR costing template, that's the National Institute for Health and Care Research, and the UK CRF study intensity tool. So that's a workforce planning tool that accurately predicts the whole time equivalent staffing numbers required for the efficient delivery of a specific study. So the intensity tool has been widely adopted by CRFs and other organisations across the UK and Ireland. And the UK CRF network has a recorded training session on their website, and you can actually download the tool from their portal as well. Then university budget calculation tools. So these are available on the Research Accounts Office webpage. They have a general budget proposal calculation tool and a specific HRB budget proposal calculation tool. So overheads for grants are between 0 and 30%, depending on the funder. Industry studies, each institution has its own overhead. For example, the CRG rate is currently 50%. And since the overhead line item is typically the single largest item in the study budget, it is one of the most crucial steps necessary for completing study budget analysis. An opportunity cost, as we mentioned previously, is profit, the required return on assets to deliver the study. Then costing studies and personnel. So we often think that the PIs, the nurses, we also need to remember people in the background, lab technicians, statisticians, data managers, etc., and cost them all in. And the salary cost will depend on how much time they spend on the trial and where the work takes place. For larger trials, there's often at least one FTE dedicated staff member on the study. Smaller trials, it may be just a few patients per month, maybe a part of a person's time daily would suffice for it. Then charging for studies. So it's the responsibility of the principal investigator to ensure they have sufficient funds to cover staff costs. For academic studies, the funds are available up front and the people are charged accordingly against them. For industry studies, there's a few options. If the PI comes through a research facility, there may be an opportunity for the facility to cover the costs up front and then recoup as the income comes in. You can sometimes build some actual salary costs into the contract with the sponsor. And if the PI is part of one of the research networks we mentioned earlier, this network can help support costs and provide staff up front. If you require a recruitment campaign, we can help with the paperwork for advertising and we aid the interview process. Please note there's a minimum 3-month turnaround time for hiring staff. That's saying it nicely. And all staff contracts have to be in place before a staff member can commence on the study. We also have CRFG core staff. So we have a number of core nurses now, and we also have a research support staff member. PIs can request part or full FTE of an available staff member for a defined period of time. And this is decided in-house based on current staffing requirements and availability and in conjunction with the appropriate line manager. Any staff costs here are apportioned to the PI cost centre via a post-proposal form, but there has to be sufficient budget to cover the full length of the staff contract. And staff, as I said, can only begin working on the study once the contract has been issued and signed and all the paperwork is in place. And one of the issues we're having at the moment is guard vetting is taking between 6 to 8 weeks. So it's slowing down starting times for people. So then costing studies. So these are just some other costs that are associated with studies that need to be budgeted in outside of the general ones. So we're talking about blood tissue samples, centre initiation and monitoring, screen failure reimbursements, etc. So then these are some funding checklists and guidelines. So the CSER report there on the National Clinical Trials Office webpage. We have HRB guidance on funding and managing a grant. And we have a HRB NCTO checklist for clinical trial costs. Okay, so then study tasks. So to accurately analyse the costs associated with running a study, you must read through the entire protocol to identify any hidden tasks that do not appear in the schedule of procedures or the budget template provided by the sponsor. The sponsor doesn't include every task when they produce the template, they stick to the major tasks. But the small tasks do add up, and so you need to add this detail to your analysis and expand the budget provided by the sponsor to include these, and it's a reasonable thing to do. You need to include relevant personnel in the review of the protocol. For example, a clinical research coordinator may know details about the tasks they're going to be involved in. A PI may note additional time and care depending on the acuity of the subject. You need to know what services you're purchasing, hospital, clinical, technical, professional, how much staff time is required, what supplies must be purchased. So you need to compare and contrast these three documents to make sure all procedures and events are included in each. So the informed consent form, schedule of procedures in the protocol, and the sponsor budget lines. Now, this is just a study task example you might get from sponsor, but on review, you may notice there's other significant items that need to be added. We've added investigator fee here, subject stipend, etc. And we also find the critical inclusion-exclusion criteria have an adverse effect on enrolment or lead to higher screen failure rates than predicted by the sponsor CRO. You can include these, and you can also make reasonable changes to these terms, such as the number of screen failures they will reimburse or the cost for each screen failure. Then there's a few critical facts to consider. I'll just mention a few of them. So phase one trial. So phase 1 trial is generally 1 to 1.5 years. Phase 2, we're talking about 2 to 3 years. Then complexity of the protocol we're looking at, there's increasingly more comparator trials. Industry-sponsored trials tend to be more labour-intensive due to performance deadlines, such as patient accrual reporting. Study team composition, are we talking about senior staff members? Are we talking about trainees? Then stage of disease may suggest how long a participant may be on the study, or if there are more nursing support required for sicker patients. Then anticipated complications such as shipping logistics, participant scheduling challenges. Then submission of case report forms, which offer bigger payments. Online data tends to consume more time than you think it will. Then cash flow, there's often a 10% holdback until the study closes, and higher payments at certain visits than others. Then just a couple of mistakes people often make is overestimating how easy it will be to obtain subjects, underestimating the amount of time for regulatory affairs, under budgeting for the unexpected, and overestimating research staff efficiency. So flow charting then. So if you break down the protocol into specific paths, each participants with sections divided out by service provider, and create a master timeline that plots each participant's usage of critical limited resources over time. For example, maybe there's only one MRI test space available per week. Understand the timelines and the deliverables that trigger payments. Create a worst case scenario and one that runs according to plan. Budget for participants completing all cycles and analyze payments for those completing less than all cycles. Perform a workload analysis by tracking all trial activities and monthly reports to document the amount of work done within a certain time frame to create benchmarks for your group. And CRF Manager can be used to track this. I'll mention that again in a minute. Obtain a clear delineation of standard of care for research events and procedures, and never agree to the sponsor's initial offer, no matter how good it seems, without first doing a full review of the protocol. So where is the budget reviewed? So a draft budget is supplied by the PI with the initial study application form submitted to Chloe. And for academic or investigator-initiated studies, a copy of the contract or grant is supplied with submission, and these are reviewed fortnightly at CRF management meetings. Following a review, the decision made whether to move to more detailed feasibility, and that will be done with the appropriate research unit. And then contract review is completed through the Clinical Research and Development Office, and Caroline will speak more to that. And an SLA is completed between the PI and the relevant research unit for each study, both academic and industry. I promise I'm nearly there. So charging for academic studies. So when studies start up, full funds are available, and these are loaded to our Aggressive system by the research office. And there's generally yearly reports. So these prompt payments are incurred for the period. The financial reports are completed in conjunction with the Research Accounts Office, and there are different research account staff members for different funding bodies. The deadlines will be provided by the funding body at the start of the study. And for yearly submissions, they're usually about 6 weeks after the period. And then there's a final report due, a closeout to the funding body. And please note, any unused funds get returned to the funding body. So better to try and use them as best you can. So then there's a research project summary available on our Aggresso accounting system. And there's Aggresso training available on a regular basis from the accounts team in the university. And there's more information on their website. And Research Accounts Office also have an FAQ section. So when you look at your summary, you can see items like the start and end date of the project, when the next financial report due is, and who the person is who is dealing with reporting for your study. Okay, charging for industry studies. So a study startup, we charge setup costs, pharmacy, hospital. Then we charge quarterly for everything else from monitored visits. Only items that can be have been monitored can be invoiced in any period. We also invoice for participant expenses quarterly. We pay them upfront and then invoice them back with the quarterly expenses. Sponsor contracts should provide details about the invoicing. They either provide us a breakdown of the monitored items ready for invoicing, or we cross-reference this against CRF Manager. So CRF Manager is our web-based resource management system. It's used by CRFs throughout the UK and Ireland. You use it for what we currently use it for booking study visits, rooms, equipment, staff time, pharmacy, etc. With basic training recordings on our CRFG's Canvas page for that. So all study visits must be listed on CRF Manager and completed to ensure accurate invoicing. And we also use CRF Manager for accurate reporting purposes. So we use it to perform workload analysis, as I said earlier, to track all trial activities, monthly reports, to document the amount of work done in a specific period to create benchmarks for the group. So then please note the length of time between something occurring and us actually getting payment can be 4 to 6 months. And any additional optional costs, such as audits or amendments, should be noted to us when they happen so we can charge for them. And then a closeout, we charge for closeout costs and archiving. And final slide. So any income received has to be reportable and transparent to your host institution. As a public body, we have an obligation to ensure transparency of funds received. We maintain a balance between academic and industry studies. We are supportive of both, but our primary focus is on academic and investigator-initiated trials. That's me. If you have any questions, you can get my email address, or I will be at the coffee break if you have any specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you.